Now, in order for us to duplicate that session persistence that we had before, we want to make sure that we check against our auth library whether or not this current user session is still persisting. So before, when we did auth.onStateChanged, once this code initialized, the auth library would of course give us our user auth object the moment it was called for the first time, even if auth state had not changed. But we're actually going to duplicate this functionality except using a Saga as well as that action pattern that we've got. So what we can do is we got to make a new action to actually issue our Saga to check. So we're going to need a new user action called check user session. And what this will do is this will tell our Saga once the app initializes, so we're still going to put in component mount, to check again if the user's auth has persisted. So what we're going to also make is a new action called check user session. And it's just a call to make the method user action types.check user session. We're going to pass this into our dispatch. So we got to make sure to bring this in to our app code. We got to recreate our map dispatch to props, which gets a dispatch. And it's simply a method that dispatches our action. Pass that back into our connect and destructure this in our component mount. And then we issue it. And now we should see that when our app initializes, we fire off our check user session action. So we just got to write the listener to actually perform this check. Now, inside of our user Saga, we are going to make a new Saga called check user session. Or let's say on check user session, because we're listening for it. And we'll yield take latest user actions dot check user session. And here we're going to make a new method, right? A new generator function that will perform the check. So what we're going to write is the method is going to be called isUserAuthenticated. And this will be our generator function. Now, how do we actually perform this check? Well, it turns out that there's no promise-based way for us to get a snapshot of whether or not our current user exists or not. The only way we can do it is we can actually make a new utility method that will leverage the existing code that we had before of checking against that onSnapshot authenticated method, but we'll just unsubscribe immediately after we get the initial value. So what does that mean? Well, let's write it out first. So we're going to export out this new method called getCurrentUser. And what we want to do is we want to return a new promise, right? Because we want to return a promise-oriented solution that our sagas can yield for. Because our sagas, just like async await, work off of promises. So we're going to make a new promise, right? We're going to pass our resolve and reject values. And then what we're going to do is we're going to actually do the same unsubscribe pattern we had, calling our auth.onAuthStateChanged method that we had before. We'll get our user auth object. And then once we get it, we're going to immediately unsubscribe. Once we unsubscribe, we're going to resolve with our user object, right? Our user auth object. And if it fails, we'll just reject with whatever error we get back. So again, if you remember, this on auth state changed or our on snapshot methods on our auth take either the succeed call, which gives us back the correct value, or they take a secondary error functional callback that gives us the error. So we're just going to pass it to reject. So now when we return this promise will resolve to the correct user auth value if there is one. If there isn't, it'll just resolve us back null, as we had before in our app.js code, if you remember. And then, of course, we'll be able to reject and catch any errors inside of this API call or this API listener. So now we're going to get current user, pass it in to our utils and into our Saga. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually check for this thing. How we're going to use it is the same way as we did with all of our other API calls. We're going to write a try block, and we're going to make sure to have our catch. And our catch is going to do a similar sign-in failure, right? Because if there is a failure in this process, then we know for sure there might be something wrong with our sign-in. And now what we're going to do is we're going to get back our user auth object when we call this method. Because as we remember, what the on auth state change gives us back is the same user auth object that we get here, right? Except it's under the user key when we get it back using these methods. Here, as we remember, we get back the user auth object. And now we're going to say if user auth is null, right? So let's say it turns out the user has never actually signed in. So there's no session here. We're just going to return out of this function. We don't want to do anything else. We're going to end the function. If instead there is a value, what we want to do is we want to call the same get snapshot from user auth, except we're going to use our user auth. We also have to make sure to pass this into our user Saga, right, to make sure we're listening for that action as well. And we know we're instantiating it on component.mount. So if we go back, we'll see that we have our check user session and then sign in success. So now we have persistence. If we refresh, right, our application will check if there's such a user exists and then sign them in if there is one. If we don't have one, so I just click sign out, our auth state is updated. If I refresh, right, check user session checks, there's no user signed in because we just signed out. And now our app just continues as normal. So pretty cool. We've managed to extrapolate pretty much all of our persistence into this new Saga, as well as create a way for us to, in a promise-oriented way, get back whether or not the user auth exists using this new get current user utility that we wrote. So now let's actually update our code so that when we sign out, it's also successful. Because right now there's no way for our application to actually sign out properly. So let's build that in the next lesson.